So over the past, I believe, I think it's been about a week, probably a bit longer, closer to about 10 days. I'd had an encounter with one recruitment agency, and we had this 30-minute talk. She didn't really have a job opportunity. She's like, no, I just want to add you to our database, and I really want us to have a sit down. And so what was supposed to be a 30-minute conversation ended up being about a 45-minute conversation. And what made it take that long was because um, towards the end, she asked me about my current cost to company. It's like, okay, so what is your current salary? I'm gonna need your pay slips and whatever else. And I said to her, um, I actually don't disclose those things. I don't disclose them at all, you know. And she said, why? And I'm like, well, because I don't think they have any bearing on whatever opportunity that you may have. I deal with every opportunity on its own merits. So that is how I go about it, and to my understanding on how payslips are actually used within the recruitment process, they're generally used as a benchmarking tool. So this is what a person is making. We'll add 15 or 20% on top of that, and that's the offer we're going to make them. And I don't think that's fair because, um, one, the scope and the responsibilities of the role may be a lot more than what I'm currently doing. Two, it could be completely different industries. Three, it could be, there's so many things that it actually could be that you cannot actually use what I'm currently earning as a metric or as a measure to to establish something else. And she says, no, I understand. And then she did everything, and I mean everything, to try and get me to disclose that. It's like, is it because you're currently underpaid? And what? I'm like, no, it has nothing to do with that at all. She's like, no, thing is, if an opportunity comes, I need to know that what they've budgeted is in line with what you're expecting and all of that. I'm like, okay, I understand that, but you could just approach me and say, listen, I've got this opportunity. What are your thoughts? And if you give me the job spec and the company itself or whatever else, I can go do my own research or anything along those lines. And within about 2 or 3 hours, I can come back with you to you with an answer and say, okay, for a role like this would be my expected. You or you could just tell me what they've budgeted. Yeah. And she tried everything. She tried everything. It's like, no, see, because when a client comes in and whatever else, like, I only get paid, or rather, I get paid in proportion to what you get paid. So uh, I try my best. Like, I will fight for you. Like, I will make sure that you get paid the absolute best that you could possibly get paid within reason and whatever else. So I mean, we've had instances where people didn't want to disclose their salary. Like a person, you find that a person is making 15,000, and then they say they want to make 30. That's not reasonable, and whatever else. And I asked her, I'm like, okay, but why is that a problem? And she was like, what do I mean? I'm like, if the company has budgeted, let's say, between 25 and 40, let's just use a huge range. And this person comes in and says, okay, for whatever reason, whether they were previously underpaid or the reason is irrelevant actually. If you've budgeted this amount and this person meets the spec of what you are looking for, almost every measure, and they say to you, I'm expecting 30, it's still within the budget. Why is the fact that they are moving from 15 to 30 a problem to you? If you are saying that you are fighting for me. She didn't have an answer for me, and she hasn't gotten back to me in over a week. So I'm not too sure I'll ever hear from her again. But it got me thinking. Like that conversation and that encounter really had me thinking about this idea of understanding the different motivations within the recruitment process. Because more often than not, when we say the job market, we're generally talking about people who are looking for jobs. So I generally just class them in three groups. You've got um, people who are unemployed, desperately looking for employment. You've got people who are employed, desperately looking to leave their current employer. And then you've got people who, let's say, are not actually looking to leave, but if a great opportunity came about, they would consider it. You understand? And more often than not, this is the group of people, and their motivation is pretty simple. These are people that are looking for stable employment at the highest compensation. Now, compensation can be anything, whether it's salary, whether it's vacation days. Now we've got like getting to work from home and all of these other things, growth opportunity, and all of that. That falls into the highest compensation. And from person to person, it will differ what they actually value the most that they would regard as adequate compensation. But those are not the only people within the job market. That's only one aspect of the job market. The other part of it is that you've got your recruiters, you've got your HR people, you've got your hiring managers and all of that. So you've got the other side of the coin or the other side of the equation where they have their motivations too. And very rarely, as a candidate, do you actually consider what is actually motivating the other side? What does a win actually look like to the other side? And if you cannot answer that, it's unlikely that you'll be able to present yourself in the best possible way in order for you to meet the needs that they actually have on the other side, because it's the needs of the people on the other side that get you hired. So if you adequately understand what the needs of the people on the other side of the table are, then you are able to say, I've got these set of skills, I've studied this, I've done this, and all of that. And this is why I think I could meet the need that you currently have. But if you are not considering the needs that they have, it becomes difficult for you to do that, you know. And what I generally do, because I'm a huge student in human behavior, I really love it. And so when I was thinking about this, I'm like, okay, from a behavioral standpoint, one of the major drivers in human behavior is fear. And so I began to think about what is the fear attached to you as a candidate. One, the fear of losing the opportunity, the fear of not having an income and not being able to take care of yourself and your loved ones, or the fear of losing the assets that you've been able to acquire over the years because now you're about to lose your job and you're not sure if you're going to be able to um, get employment within that time period. All of those things are valid fears. And so the question I had was, okay, if those are the fears on this side of the equation, what are the fears that exist on the other side? What's actually, because fear is a huge driver. Like a lot of what we do is avoiding ourselves, creating us, putting ourselves in situations where we are not afraid. That's often what we do. That is why if you're to see a snake or whatever, so the first thing you do is take a step back, or the first thing you do is freeze. It's like, don't go closer to the thing that we're afraid of. You know, so it's a general driver of human behavior. So I began to think about what is the actual fear attached on the other side. And there's this idea by Rory Sutherland, the VP of Ogilvy UK, in a talk that he gave. Like I think about this quote so often because it's so good. It's like, in business to consumer, you've got the fear of loss, which makes sense within the context of um, you as the candidate. I'm like, okay, if so, even in that context, it lends itself to that. Losing out on the opportunity, losing out on the job, and all of that. Cool. And then he says, but in B2B, you have the fear of blame. And it's like, that is why the catchphrase, no one ever got fired for buying IBM, is so brilliant. So on the other side, from a business standpoint, or whoever the person representing the business is concerned, they're not actually concerned with like a fear of loss, like losing out on a good candidate or whatever. No, what's driving them, what they are trying to minimize is the fear of being blamed for overspending on a specific candidate, let's say, or taking too long in the recruitment process and still not hiring a competent individual. You know, so there's all of these. So the dynamic of fear is not the same, and so the resolution of how then do you mitigate the fear that they have, you need to take that into account, because if they're like, because it's not their money, it's not their business, so they are not really worried about how much they are particularly going to spend. They are particularly worried about how they'll be blamed in, and minimizing that fear of being blamed. So I started to actually really think about that, because I think I did a series of posts as well on LinkedIn about this whole conversation, and some of the things that really did lend themselves to that is some people who are in these hiring manager positions started sharing a bit of light, because I couldn't make sense of it. I couldn't make sense of why the salary conversation is such a contentious conversation, and it is. Like, and it's consistently a contentious conversation. And I couldn't make sense of it. I'm like, okay, what are the motivations here? And one of the guys who didn't want to say too much because, I mean, it's on LinkedIn, it's a professional site, blah, blah, blah. But he was like, there are actual KPIs and bonuses attached to um, basically filling a vacancy below budget. I'm like, okay, that makes sense. So you are incentivizing a specific human behavior. Okay, I'm starting to get that. That began to shed a whole lot more light, you know. But in addition to that, when I was thinking about what he said, I began to think about this recruitment lady. I'm like, because it's like when I have a client that's looking for a candidate, and when I was thinking about this, I said, okay, so you are not the client as the candidate. This person is trying to meet a specific need for their specific candidate. And from, I think it's a business analysis standpoint, stakeholder engagement and whatever else, this person has a responsibility to their client to bring in the best possible candidate that they have that's willing to come in at a specified budget. That's just how it is. You understand? So if you're historically underpaid, it's unlikely that you're going to encounter, let's say, a recruitment agency or even a hiring manager that's going to say, dude, this is not what you're supposed to be making. You're actually supposed to be making double or triple what you're making now based on your knowledge, experience, blah, blah, blah. Because one, some companies have structured it in such a way that you are you basically incentivize them coming in under budget, yet hiring some of these rock stars, which is important. But I also, when I was thinking about this, I'm like, okay, but you cannot blame whether it be the recruitment agency or the recruiter themselves, or even the hiring manager. I mean, if that's how these companies are structured, fair enough. But when I began to think about my conversation with this recruiter, I'm like, one of the things she cannot do, which she says she would do, but she just can't. She said, I will fight for you. I'm like, when you look at the different motivations and the incentives, she can't possibly fight for me. She will not be able to fight for me at the level that I would be able to fight for myself. And the reason is simple. You know, you need to think of yourself as a candidate. And from a business standpoint, one of the things, especially from a recruitment standpoint, you're a very bad customer because you don't scale. Like if this recruiter gets you placed, and this is like an absolute perfect fit for you and your career and where you are at and whatever, chances are you could find yourself there for the next 5 years or even 10 years or spend the rest of your career there because you just go up the ladder within that organization. Everything that you do post this current engagement, where now you get placed into the organization, that's what they get paid for. And in some instances, like whether you stay a year and whatever else, but that's generally what they get paid for. So it's now not within their best interest to fight with you, or rather to fight for you, to the point where it ruined their relationship with their client. Because you can get placed once, but this client, as the company grows, as people leave and whatever else, can come back to the recruiter and say, well, I've got another opening. I'm actually looking for, let's say, another this or another that, and whatever else. Can you help me? I'm looking for this. And all of that is repeat business. So they need to basically maintain this relationship with this client. So you on the other side, you are a candidate. You have no real relationship with this specific client of theirs or this organization or this company. You're just trying to get employed at this point. So if this goes south and there's a breakdown in terms of salary negotiation and whatever, ultimately you don't care. You'll find a job eventually. So you don't necessarily care about whether this actually falls through or not. So like the relationship can basically fall apart and you won't necessarily care. So from a fighting standpoint, um, it's not within the recruiter's best interest to fight for you to the point where the relationship with the specific client or company is then strained. And that's another thing that I think about often is like people will do what they believe is best for them. That is a that is as sure as the sunrise. And it's an unreasonable expectation to expect otherwise. And so one of the things I think about whenever I have engagements with people is what is best for this person in this engagement? What does a win actually look like for them? Because then I know that is what they will be pushing for. And if there's an element of contention between what's good for them versus what's good for you, the person that's involved in this engagement, then you cannot expect them to fight for you. It doesn't make sense, you know. So that's something that I started to really, I've really been thinking about it so deeply. It's like I think we're so ill prepared, especially coming out of varsity and high school and whatever, and entering the job market. We're so ill prepared for the job market because we enter in really with a real level of naivety. We think a person is just generally just going to pay you what you're worth, or they're just going to pay you what they've budgeted. Um, they won't do that if it's not within their best interest to actually do that. So you need to take into account what exactly is their best interest in this situation. And once you have that, once you actually understand this is what is within the best interest of the organization or whatever stakeholder you are actually dealing with, then you can actually understand what's driving their behavior, what's driving their motivations. And so in an instance like that, and I think this is where I did another post as well where I spoke about the salary conversation. And I said the salary conversation is not a needs conversation. It can't be a needs conversation. It's a value conversation. It needs to be a value conversation. So you need to be able to, um, especially vocalize, primarily vocalize. You need to be able to explain why you believe this is what you should be um, paid or rewarded or compensated. You need to be able to build an argument for that. And if you cannot do that, then you're gonna find yourself in a bit of trouble because if you're making 15 and you believe you need to be making 45, no one is just going to hand you 45 simply because you said you wanted 45. You need to be able to justify why it is you need 45 for your services, for you to join this organization. You're going to need to be able to explain why 45 is your number. And your reason for this cannot be um, my grandmother's retired and whatever can't take care of herself. My mom isn't working. I've got siblings to take care of and whatever. Okay, your needs. Okay, but from a business standpoint, they are not the business's problem. So the conversation cannot be needs based. So it cannot be a conversation of I have needs and this is how much I'm going to need to actually fulfill these needs. The conversation has to be, well, based on the knowledge and skills and whatever that I actually bring here and the past performance that I've actually been able to exhibit in my previous organization, this is the value I would be able to bring to the specific company. So if you've got previous wins in your current organization, and especially if they're huge wins, like if you're an account manager or whatever, and you're able to bring in X amount from a client or an existing client and all of these other things, or you've got a network of people, all of those things lend themselves to the value that you bring to the organization. And so you need to speak about it within that context. You need to speak about it within the value context where you say, this is the value I would be bringing. This is the knowledge I'm bringing. I'll be bringing a whole lot of understanding in terms of automation, data analytics, and all of these other things. And as a result of that, because of the value that I will be bringing in, I do feel like this value, this number is a reasonable expectation for the value I would be bringing in, which is primarily what I do. Like, I don't, as soon as I started to learn about the recruitment process and I started to make sense of, oh, okay, um, the negotiation doesn't start at the point of an offer being made. The negotiation starts from the point of after a recruiter or a hiring manager or whoever makes first contact with you, whether it's after you send a CV or whatever else. From the point where actual human engagement exists, the negotiations have started. And all of what you are doing, everything you say, everything you do, everything that you present to them, either builds an argument that this is how much you are worth or detracts from that argument. So, well, when I was learning, and this is part of why I don't actually share um, my payslip or my current cost to company and whatever else, because it, it hurts your argument. Because you can be part of a specific organization and say, for my services in this organization, you're gonna have to pay me X. Okay. And then you'll detail all of your wins, but then the question is going to come back and say, well, you were willing to do all of those wins because you're saying you're bringing in those wins, but you are being paid 15. Now you're asking for 30 for the same level of engagement. It doesn't make sense. So a lot of this actually hurts your case. You understand? So especially if you're underpaid, like it's one of the things that I recommend. One person, when I said that to them, said some recruiters or many recruiters or many recruitment agencies will then most likely not even consider you for the role or whatever else. Like it'll basically just end the engagement. And I'm like, okay, it might happen. Like I think I've never been in a situation where my refusal to hand over my payslip or um, share my current cost to company ended an engagement. But I have had more than one instance where I'm the one that dropped out of the engagement, where I had a situation with one recruiter. It was 2021, late in 2021. I wasn't really looking to move, and I was open and I was honest from the onset. I'm not really looking to move right now, but send me the job spec. Let me take a look at it. I might be perhaps tempted to make a move, or I might be able to recommend someone who would be willing to take on the role. They sent me the job spec. I said, okay, this looks interesting. I think I might know someone, or I can't remember exactly the engagement. Either I said I might know someone, or I said I think I might be interested. And then the next question from them, and this was on email, and said, okay, I just need to know what your current cost to company is. And I said to them, okay, I don't disclose that. If you can tell me what the company has budgeted, then I would be able to tell you whether that will work for me. And she said to me, she responded saying, percentage above current cost to company. I said, that can't possibly be true. In my head, I didn't really type it out. Like, that can't possibly be true. I said, because you don't know what I'm making right now. So I could be like completely out of budget for you. And if that's the case, you're not going to be able to give me percentage above current cost to company. That's not how this works. There's a number that the company will not go beyond. You see. And from that engagement, she really wouldn't tell me. And I'm like, okay, yeah, I don't know anyone that would be interested. And I don't think this is the right move for me right now. But from the other side of the coin, I've never been in an instance where my refusal to disclose my current cost to company was, let's say, a deal breaker, especially early on. Especially early on. Like, especially once you've been given the job spec, or perhaps you've come to know who the company is and whatever else, you can do a bit of like desktop research and whatever else, and you can arrive at like a ballpark figure and say, okay, this might be um, my expected. So generally, like if I'm generally pushed for a number, I'll give an expected. I'll say this is my expected, and then they can decide what they want to do with that information. But with that being said, and this is something that I think often we aren't taught. Like I'm learning so much about negotiation and whatever else, and it's really an interesting study. And a lot of what negotiation is learning to keep your own emotions in check. Like you hear someone who say, "Yeah, but like, what if I lose the opportunity?" You don't have the opportunity up until you have an offer. This is not your opportunity. So, and that's literally how I generally engage with like recruitment agencies and companies and whatever. I'm not too concerned about whether this ends up with an offer or not. And there's a reason for this, and it's one of the things that I always advise. You cannot I'm struggling to find a reason or a way in which that's actually possible. You cannot properly negotiate with an organization unless you can walk away. To me, it seems like a precondition in the negotiation process. You have to be willing to walk away. And you must have a number where if this is what they come in as and they're not willing to move from this number, like we kind of it's a non-starter, you know. And that's one of the things that I generally recommend with people. I did a post as well, probably 2 or 3 weeks ago. I said the worst time to look for a job is when you need one, because the desperation weakens your negotiation power because you feel like you can't afford to lose this opportunity. But if you're happy generally with the organization that you're with, you're perhaps looking for growth and whatever else, but you're willing to wait. Like this can take 3 months, can take 6 months. You're not really in a rush. For me personally, I think that's when you are in the best position to be in the job market because one, you can push the envelope, like you can really push back on some recruiters or hiring managers and whatever. It's like you can push back, and that's a good thing. Like you can walk away from certain engagements because you're not desperate. So that's generally my advice. Is like it's either you're employed or you've got enough to keep you going for a reasonable amount of time. You know, I call that keep the lights on money. Like as long as you've got keep the lights on money, uh, you can be relatively pushy within the job market because I think a lot of people feel so. I'm trying to find a proper word for it. They feel powerless. They basically feel like a car in an assembly line where or in a showroom where the person walks in and says, I'm looking for a GTI or I'm looking for an A class or I'm looking for an AMG. And they're like, oh, we've got 100 AMGs, you know. And the AMG doesn't really have a choice. It's really a question of what this person is looking for in terms of specs and whatever. And then they'll just choose one. That's generally how people actually feel when it comes to the job market. I've seen people on LinkedIn like, this whole recruitment process is an issue of luck and whatever. It's like you really have no real say. And I think that's what um, causes so many people to even be afraid of negotiating or even saying anything about what they're expecting from their prospective employer. But what it does, and this is one of the things that doing so many posts on salaries, you see so many people actually disgruntled about how much they're making. You see so many people that are unhappy about the recruitment process, but they feel so powerless. I had a conversation with one lady, I think it was 2 days ago, whatever, it was on LinkedIn. And that was literally my statement to her. I'm like, you're not powerless in the recruitment process. Like you getting a job is not the company doing you a favor. You've got a set of knowledge or a set of skills or a set of certifications and whatever else that show that you can solve a series of problems that the organization has. So you getting an offer is not them doing you a favor. They are looking at their problems, they are looking at what they need to get done and whatever else, and they're fairly confident you would be able to do that with a reasonable amount of training and whatever else or onboarding. You'll be able to actually handle the set of problems they have. So them are making you an offer is not them doing you a favor. You are not powerless in this in the entire engagement, you know. But with that being said, you have to understand the different motivations. You have to understand what is a win for them. What is it that they are trying to achieve? What is it that they are actually looking for? And do you have that set of skills? I had a conversation with a multinational, it was about 2 weeks ago now, and I was speaking to basically the guy, if I were to take the opportunity, the guy that I would be reporting to. And after that, I was talking to one lady, and I'm like, yeah, I don't think this is going to be for me. And she asked me, like, why? And I'm like, firstly, this is what it's a customer support role. And I'm like, I don't really think I want to do that. You know, like the way in which the role was explained and whatever else and stuff. I'm like, no, I'm not particularly interested in that line of work. You understand? So because of the position that I'm in, I'm able to say, okay, I'd like to pull out of that engagement. or in that entire process. And they'll try to talk you out of it. No, it's a great opportunity and whatever else. The company is really expanding in South Africa and whatever. So we really no, like but the only way in which you can actually get to that point is one, you need to learn to understand the market that you're in. You need to understand the different motivations involved in the recruitment process. You need to understand what the organization is actually looking for. One of the things I enjoy about myself, particularly, is that I really just like helping people. So when a recruitment agency calls me or whatever and asks me about a specific role, or I'm really trying to help them find the best possible candidate, and that person might not be me. So more often than not, at this point, I think I'm probably getting like 2 or 3 emails or calls a week or something like that. It ebbs and flows, obviously. But I'll generally say to them, okay, I don't think I'm the right person for this, but I might know someone, you know. And that's literally what I'll do. I'll say, okay, I don't think I'm the right person for this, but I might know someone who actually is. Or in some instances, I'll say there was one role that was interesting, but they would need me to move to Cape Town. I'm like, no, not right now. You know. But I can be that way because I'm not desperate. I'm not trying to get a deal over the line. I'm not trying to. Um, I'm not desperate for a new job. I'm not desperate for any of those other things. Like I'm relatively happy where I'm at right now. So it allows you to actually think about the other person and say, okay, um, I think I might know who might be able to fill this role. And in some instances, you're able to look at the role and say, okay, this is maybe not a good fit. I fit too much of the job spec. That's another problem. Like once you actually come to know more about the role itself, there are certain instances where you need to say, okay, I'm not the right person because I don't think I would grow enough in this role. I think I fit it too perfectly. I'll almost feel a bit cramped up. But the only way in which you can actually do that is one, really understand your own motivations and your own fears and be able to regulate that in those situations. Two, understand the motivations of the people on the other side. They are not necessarily your enemy, but the motivations are not the same. And once you can actually make peace with that, once you can actually come to understand it, then it becomes easier for you to be able to provide real value for them and understand that the entire recruitment process is a negotiation. So don't divulge information that's going to work against you later. Because in as much as early on in the recruitment process, they are gathering information that helps them make their own decision. So they'll ask you about your competencies, the softwares you've worked on, well, depending on the role, all of these other things, what your current cost to come to them, that allows them to formulate a bit of an assessment about, okay, this is the type of person we're really dealing with here. One, they're within budget. They have, give or take, the necessary skills we have. They might not necessarily have the experience and what else, but I think that's something we might be able to, let's say, maybe overlook depending on the role. They're on a fact-finding mission, so you want to also get enough information so that you can also build your own argument. So you want to be asking questions like, is this a new role or is it because someone else is leaving? If it's someone that's leaving, why did they leave? That gives you that gives you an idea of the type of organization you might be joining. One of the things I generally do is I speak to people that either currently work there or have worked at that organization. That gives you some real information. Like that really gives you a bit of information. You know, and all of that you want to also be on a fact finding mission on for yourself. So because one, you can be given the job spec, but now you need to also make sense of the company as a whole. So you want to do the research of the company itself. What does that look like? The department you'd be joining, what department is this? How does your specific knowledge set, your knowledge and your set of skills actually lend itself to what they're doing in that organization? You want to have an understanding of that. You want to be able to really provide meaningful value to them. And once you can do that, and generally you want to do this like from the onset. So once you actually have like an interview scheduled or whatever else, then you can You want to have that information, give or take, in your back pocket, so that when you get there and you are being asked, let's say, behavioral questions and whatever else, you can answer those questions within the context of their specific company. So you can say, okay, in my current organization, this is what we did, or this is the problem we had, this is how I solved the problem. I think this is how that specific win or the knowledge that I gained from that or the set of skills that I've now acquired would be able to lend themselves to this specific problem that your organization might have right now. All of those things are things that you can then do, you know, because you are trying to show them, I think I understand the problem that you have based on the job spec, based on the research I've done of the organization, some of the conversations I've had with people within the company. I've got a clearish picture of what that looks like. Sometimes, and I've come to enjoy those types of interviews where, on the onset, either it's the hiring manager or whoever it is, gives you an idea of the organization. They give you an idea of the role, and that allows you to formulate your answers within the context of the information that you're actually given. So now you are helping them see that you've got the necessary skills to actually solve that problem. you know I told one lady in one of on LinkedIn or something, she was commenting on one of my posts, and I said to her, I think it was actually in relation to this idea of understanding the the motivations of the different people within the recruitment process. And she said, I've never actually considered that. I've actually not considered what the motivations of the people on the other side of the table actually are. Like, what's a win for them? What exactly are they looking for? And I'm like, it's weird because you have your own dreams and your own desires. I mean, this could be a dream company you want to work for and whatever else. But it is your ability to minimize the fear that exists on the other side of the table, and being able to present yourself as one, the least risky individual. So the one that minimizes the likelihood of them being blamed for hiring you, but also your ability to paint yourself in such a way as the a really competent person that will be able to solve the problems that they have, will be a team player, depending on whatever it is that they're looking for. That's what gets you hired. It's not your own fears, it's not your own motivations, um, and your own reasons for wanting employment. It's your ability to understand why they are looking for someone. It's your ability to actually alleviate the fears on their side. What exactly are they still uncomfortable about? That's one of my questions that I like asking at the end of an interview. What are you still uncomfortable about? Like, what questions are still, like, you're not really all that clear in? And sometimes they'll actually tell you and say, okay, I'm not 100% sure about this. Could you maybe clarify this? Where, okay, you mentioned this, but we didn't really get into too much detail. Can we deal with that? And once you're able to actually look into those things, once you're actually able to work on those things, you are able to actually provide them with more and more value. You're able to provide them with more and more context, because now you are trying to solve their problem. You are trying to alleviate their own uncertainties. You are trying to alleviate their own reluctancies about you perhaps being the perfect fit. But for you to do that, you want to be able to minimize your own fears. You want to minimize your own desperation and how much you actually want the job. Because a lot of those emotions, they blind you. They cause you to become more self-conscious than you probably should be during an interview. And that's what generally where people say, nerves got the better of me and whatever else. That's generally what happens. Like, you had fears and anxiousness and whatever else that really got in your way. you know so one of the things I do in that instance, and I do it all the time, I always say, I will get a job. It doesn't have to be this one. And as soon as I say that, I mean, I'm employed right now, but I say that all the time when I have to go to an interview and I'm feeling a bit nervous or whatever. So I say, no, I'll get a job. It doesn't have to be this one. And that, because I've now placed the burden of this specific interview and I've now like put it much, much lower. It's like, okay, there's not much riding on this specific interview. Like, I've got keep the lights on money. I'm still relatively happy in my organization. So when I have this conversation, even if it's just an opening conversation, trying to understand what it is they're looking for, I might know someone who could solve that. when I say that to myself, I can literally feel the anxiety dissipate. And once that happens, I'm able to then focus a lot more attention on the other person. So now I'm focusing on their facial expressions. I'm looking at, okay, what is it that appeals to them? What doesn't appeal to them? From the answers that I give, I'm constantly looking at the feedback that they are giving with their body language. What is it that they write down? What exactly attracts them and whatever. So I'm constantly focusing on them. I'm constantly trying to understand what their needs are. What is it that they're trying to understand? What information that they need that will help them make a decision. I'm constantly focused on the person on the other side of the table, and you're helping them say, okay, you're using the knowledge and skills that you actually have, and you're able to say to them, okay, listen, if you've got this problem, have you considered this? Have you thought about this? Do you have this in place? What about this? Those are questions that you are now able to come up with as the conversation goes along, because one, you're not desperate. Two, you're focusing on them and you're trying to help them paint a proper picture of the type of person that they're actually looking for. What is interesting about what I generally do with this method is, more often than not, you're talking to, depending on whether you're talking to an HR person or the hiring manager and whatever, sometimes you find yourself like, one, you can state the obvious, but two, there's sometimes where you're stating things that they perhaps had not considered. And now it changes their view on the role itself. So now you're thinking about, okay, did we think about this? What about this? Do we have this in place? What happens when this happens? So those are questions that you are now asking, and it's also now changing their view on the role. And once you're able to actually change the way that they see the role and how important the role can become, it changes the way in which they see everyone else that will come about within the role. So whether you're the first person that was interviewed or whether you're the last person that was interviewed, now you've raised important ideas and important facts. One, it could be because they hadn't considered that, and now you've changed the way that they look at it. But two, you may have raised things that they have already taken into account, but no one else was actually asking about that. So now you're already thinking about the problems they might have, some of the things they would encounter, and how you would potentially solve that and whatever. So now it it causes you to stand out. Like I've never had an instance where this didn't work, you know. But for you to be able to do that, like it's not even like a set of questions that you ask. No, it's you're wanting to understand the problem that they have and how this role actually fixes that problem, and using the set knowledge of skills, or rather set knowledge and the skills that you have to paint a proper picture of what the person would feel this role will actually look like, or your understanding of it. And once you're able to paint that picture, it increases your value, changes the way that they look at you, and whatever else. And once you're able to do that, then within the context of the role itself, they're looking at you and they're saying, I think we found our person. I think we found the right person, because this person seems to understand this role a lot better than most people. And that's what you're looking for. That's the value, because now you are focused on them, where most people that will be coming in will be focused on themselves. So they'll be talking about, oh, I got straight A's in varsity, or this or that, or whatever else. I'm looking to grow, I'm looking to make more money and all of those other things. Whereas when you are coming in, because you are able to alleviate a lot of that self-consciousness about yourself, you can now focus on them. You can focus on their fears. You can focus on their ambitions. You can focus on their specific outcomes, and you can then help them arrive at those outcomes through the interview process. And I think we're really not taught that. Like, we're really not taught about how to actually do that. And I think that works against us in the recruitment process. Like, I tell people all the time, like, getting a job is not difficult. It's really about understanding the set of problems that an individual or an organization has and how you would solve them, and you are willing to solve them for X amount a month. That's literally what getting a job is. It's not that difficult. You know, so the ability to actually see problems, understand problems, your willingness to learn the necessary knowledge and skills to solve those problems, that's what allows you to become employable. It's even becoming employable is not that difficult. You know, you just need to find problems that you find interesting enough for you to put in the time and the effort to gain the knowledge, to gain the skills so that you can solve those problems. It's not that difficult at all. But I think what makes it difficult is that we are so ill equipped and so ill prepared in our understanding of the job market that it ends up working against us. Like this was a much longer rant than I thought it would be, but those are my current thoughts about understanding the recruitment process and understanding some of the various aspects that I think starting out I didn't even know and I didn't even understand them. But now I'm coming to understand them a lot better because if you can understand the motivations and the fears of the person interviewing you and you work towards alleviating those fears and uncertainties, it increases the likelihood that you are deemed the less risky choice. And that, more often than not, is what gets you hired.